Hello and welcome to this Fireside Chat, BCDR for Mission Critical Apps in Kubernetes. Today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Portworx and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Mackenzie Puddesy with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this conversation today because more than ever before, organizations are looking to run mission critical applications on Kubernetes, and therefore it's critical to ensure these applications are highly available and resilient. We would all love to believe that we've built this impregnable fortress of solitude that no one can find and no one can infiltrate. But we also know that with the ever-evolving complexity of the threat landscape and bad actors, well, we have to start planning for that day when the worst very well could happen. That doesn't mean we don't focus on the defenses, right? It means we think about the need for a BCDR or business continuity and disaster recovery strategy that is tailored for Kubernetes workloads so that our very worst day isn't actually that bad. Today, we're going to hear from some top experts at Portworx, IDC, Red Hat, and Intel who are here to discuss the ecosystem, help you achieve the strong BDCR plan, and inform you about apps in Kubernetes you can utilize in order to have peace of mind in the proactive sense and reactive sense. This is going to be such a cool conversation, and I can't wait to get started. So let's zip through the housekeeping, and then we'll get on our way. First, I do want to draw your attention to the questions section of your webinar console. This is the best place to get involved, get interactive, and post all of your insightful questions, comments, feedback, and ideas. We really do want to hear from you. So find that questions tab now and start out by saying hi, hello, wave, and give a little hello shout out to the community that's here with you today. As a quick side note, that window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you're having any technical issues during the session. Knock on wood, of course. Don't forget that a browser refresh should get rid of the usual tech gremlins, but if not, just shoot a message in that questions tab and the Actual Tech Media crew will be happy to help. And the last thing I want to point out on your audience console is the handouts tab. Go check out some cool resources and follow-ups to our conversation today. It is packed with great info. And first and foremost, be sure to click the Get Started with Portworx, where you will get linked to the Resource Center and be just one click away from taking the first step to learn about Portworx or try out the platform. And if all that cool content wasn't enough, a sweet giveaway is something we'll also have today. There's a $250 Amazon gift card as a prize that will be drawn at the end of the webinar. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you're not sure about what those are, you can find all the full T's and C's linked in the handouts tab as well. Okay, well, that is it for the housekeeping, and I told you I would keep it short and sweet. So now we are ready to start our webinar. I'm so excited to introduce to you all Chris Crow, the Senior Technical Marketing Manager at Portworx by Pure Storage. We have Johnny Yu, Research Manager, Storage and Computing, IDC, Brian Cattle, Cloud Solutions Architect at Intel, and Michael St. Jean, Global Technical Alliance Executive from Red Hat. Chris, Johnny, Brian, Michael, what a great crew. I'm so excited to learn more about the BDCR for mission critical apps. And I know you have a lot of great info to discuss among you. So let's get this rolling. Chris, I think I'm going to kick this over to you and we'll get the show on the road.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Today, we really have a fireside chat put together for you guys around BCDR for mission critical applications in Kubernetes. And joining me today, we have Johnny, Research Manager for Storage and Computing at IDC, Michael St. Jean from Red Hat, and Brian Cadell from Intel. I'll actually start with you, Johnny. I'd love to get a round of introductions going.
Sure. I'm Johnny Yu. I'm a research manager at IDC, and I cover data protection and container data management.
Oh, great. My name is Chris Crow. I'm a technical marketing manager here at Portworx, formerly in the field sales, and doing a little bit of the emceeing for this chat. Michael?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Michael St. John. I'm at Red Hat. I am part of the partner ecosystem team at Red Hat. I'm a technical strategist, and I'm focused on cross-route initiatives within our partner ecosystem.
And Brian?
Thank you. Yeah, Brian Cadell, Intel Cloud Solution Architect. And my charter, my focus is really around supporting kind of a handful of Southeast sellers in the enterprise and some of our network and storage ISVs.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, I wanted to start a little bit here with the market conditions, and this is really some of the findings out of this IDC report. I guess I wanted to open it up a little bit. Were there any surprises to the folks on the call here?
It was I've been watching this space for a while, so I was not surprised.
It's kind of confirmation.
Right.
Yeah.
I was a little curious about what I found surprising is that percentage of the most challenging aspect of moving over to these modern application architectures is adapting existing processes to support these new containerized applications. Johnny, do you have any insights to this particular section?
Yeah, and I think looking back on it now, it's not as surprising why it's such a big chunk of this pie here. So in the earlier days of container adoption, people were hoping that it was as easy as just kind of moving the containers into this new kind of environment architecture, and not realizing that when they do so, they break a lot of things. So not so much in the applications themselves, but in all the things that are attached to it. So things like a security software that's dependent on it, or any number of data protection related things such as backup and recovery, and so on. So basically, a lot of the tools that they had used to support these applications before they were containerized no longer work afterwards. And that's the biggest challenge that they were trying to overcome. And this is especially the case for critical applications where you kind of need that stuff. So you can't just containerize that and then suddenly not have backup working for it.
I think overall, when I kind of look at that, and that's not surprising to me at all, because that's kind of how we generated Red Hat OpenShift, right? Kubernetes is great orchestrator for containers, but then there's so many additional projects that have revolved, and satellite projects have evolved around that to address things like the cluster availability and the application services and the data services that are all wrapped around these applications. And as we at Red Hat look at the entire platform, we've brought in and hardened all of these different projects to make Kubernetes not just about the orchestration of containers, but really having a full on-grade enterprise level application development and deployment platform.
That's a good point. Kubernetes is a big place. There's a lot of potential variability in there. That's kind of my second surprise here, that a lack of skill set was only a challenge for 11.2% of folks. Speaking from my own learning journey, it's been one of the more difficult transitions of my career. So maybe that's just a personal reflection at this point. Any other thoughts about this?
No, you're dead on the lack of skill set. I think this is more a matter of the extent to which these supporting processes have been like basically underestimated. I think in those earlier days of container adoption, people were looking at containers and containerized applications in a vacuum, basically, and not realizing that, hey, there are all these like connections that you got to think about. You can't just move an app and suddenly, none of it exists in a vacuum. Is basically what it comes down to.
We move on to our next point here. So, and kind of talking a little bit about, I guess the challenges faced by OpenShift customers for BCDR. Michael, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, BCDR is obviously a very important area for any business critical type applications, business continuity is essential, for any enterprise grade applications, business critical applications. But disaster recovery, I think, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So, having a secure backup and recovery strategy at a remote site might actually constitute disaster recovery for some people. But then depending on the criticality of the application, recovery time might not be sufficient for a given use case. So, from that perspective, when we look at we look at BCDR, we look at it as more of a continuum of different services that are available and can be drawn from, to really encompass a full end-to-end strategy. So, for example, I think a lot of customers, we see in the field some of the challenges that they come up with. You need to be able to recover an application quickly on cluster. And then if the site goes down, you have different choices. If your recovery time objective, for example, for an application is very critical, you might have like a metro failover in place where you have synchronous data replication and you have a process to automate the recovery of those applications. But then to protect against more regional disasters, you might be looking at a continental asynchronous replication strategy. And then, of course, security and compliance is also a big challenge. And we see, with ransomware attacks on the rise, really looking at an immutable backup with role-based access controls is also very essential to the requirements of the BCDR strategy. Ransomware being just one of many disasters that you could encounter with your company, with your applications. I think also we're seeing a lot of companies looking in ways that they can modernize their overall application development and deployment systems. And a solution that not only addresses applications and containers, but also traditional applications that might be being moved into virtual machines and Kubernetes with the KubeVirt project or Red Hat's iteration of that, OpenShift virtualization. It's very important for organizations who are looking to streamline their application modernization strategy. And moreover, what we're seeing is that organizations are working with our system integrator partners to develop more of a holistic approach to BCDR, and then adopting a multi-tiered approach that includes things like application granular disaster recovery, so app owners can actually manage their own DR policies above and beyond the platform DR that's managed by the DevOps teams. All of those things, like, for example, on this slide, we have active, and maybe you have an active deployment in a metro cluster, but then you might also have like an active clusters where you have applications that are active in each of those clusters, but they're passive to one another. So you have a active passive on the application granularity and active on the clusters.
Interesting. And I'm curious what you guys kind of see around the trends of kind of moving some BCDR functions from being more app-centric. Like if I have a database, there's of course a lot of things I can do within that database to replicate being active, and then a passive copy, versus using tools that are integrating with the platform. I see some parallels here with how virtualization started, where when it first happened, we all managed everything at the OS level. But I'm kind of curious what you guys have seen in that journey, just amongst the customers and practitioners that you've talked to.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, one area is, looking at replication areas for your clusters, and then, the replication strategy for a database, for example. Like if you look at Enterprise DB, or if you're looking at something that's more like a distributed database like Cockroach DB or something like that, your ability to have that recovery through the application space, and it might even go out to a continental cluster type of deployment. Those things taken into consideration you may have to acquiesce the database in order to do a snapshot or a backup of that snapshot, so that you're not interfering with the intricacies of the application running on that database, in order to keep your recovery point objectives close to zero. So these are all things that you have to take into consideration as well, and being able to build that into your tool set for your disaster recovery tools is, I think, very important as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's also something to be said about reducing some of that complexity, because the more different data services that I have to have folks further up the stack that are closer to the application take care of all of these BCDR functions, versus using tools that maybe can protect a lot of different databases with has some, definitely, I think, some returns for customers, as I see from everybody I've chatted with, kind of moving a little more in that direction. Of course, it as with everything, it always depends. But any other thoughts on this?
Yeah,
Oh.
Chris, the other thing I'll bring up, because you brought up a good point there, is some of the some of the differences between like trying to accomplish this data center to data center, like on-prem to on-prem, or multiple data centers from an on-prem perspective versus on-prem to, say, a CSP or a hyperscaler. You introduce some additional variables there that, when you think of being able to trust that stack, becomes even more important, just because of some variability that you could introduce with that. So just another point I wanted to bring up.
Yeah. And that's a good point.
Yeah.
Some folks are looking at, hey, maybe they're running a self-managed deployment, maybe they're running an on-premise deployment of OpenShift with their applications, and they want to be able to recover someplace, but they don't want to pay for that service up front. So maybe they're looking at a managed service like Rosa, our Red Hat OpenShift on AWS service, or Arrow, our Azure managed service, that allows them to very quickly recover in a space like that without paying the premium for having a whole set of gear set up elsewhere.
Well, so talking a little bit about what the challenges are, let's move on to a little bit about, well, what are the characteristics of a performant BCDR solution?
Sure, and I think the first point there is probably the most important. If you want it to be a performant BCDR solution, then the implication there is that we're looking at 0 RPO, low recovery time. So since the idea is that you're going to be using this for your most critical applications, then this is pretty much non-negotiable. So the 0 RPO, low RTO. I think the second point here too is something that kind of is unique to when we're talking about containers. I think we do need to call out that integration point between the container orchestration software and the replication software. We need to make sure that that's not one of the bottlenecks for this BCDR solution, because this kind of serves as like this kind of like critical junction point where not like just the data, but like application artifacts, secrets, and basically all the parts that you need to rebuild everything into the recovery environment. That's all here. And you don't want the software to be the bottom, like the integration between those two software to be, where the problem lies. You want them to be working perfectly together. And then flexibility really reflects back on what Michael was saying earlier about how we want to kind of create a spectrum of recoverability, because whatever your performant BCDR solution is for, it's not going to strictly just be for the most critical of your applications. You're going to want to use asynchronous replication for some recoveries, and then snapshots for another, and so on. You want to be able to kind of create this whole spectrum of recovery and then kind of map your applications accordingly based on how critical they are. So that's where the flexibility comes in. The automation piece is important, because if we know anything about BCDR, most of the work is preparation. And then hopefully you never actually have to do a recovery, but we know that will happen. But that's maybe like about 2% of the actual work that's being executed. And most of that prep work is tedious and boring. Like there's no way around that, you know? Yeah, so to the amount that you can automate that, that really reduces the administrative burden, because like basically every time there's a new application, you know, to protect, that's going to increase administrative burden. You know, it's one more app that you need to prepare BCDR for. To the extent that you can automate that, you know, to be able to have something that can recognize applications and immediately apply a policy to it or something like that, you know, or automating tasks such as during recovery, such as like, you know, following runbooks and trying to recover applications in the right order. That's really helpful because that really helps with scaling. Because again, we're talking about environments that we're expecting to continue to scale forever, which means you're going to, you know, want that automation to be able to reduce that tedium. And then finally, the integration between the software and the hardware itself. So in order for a performant BCDR solution that can hit, like, you know, the 0 RPO and low RTOs, you want to make sure that this is also not another bottleneck. You know, you want to make sure that the hardware that's running the software is assured, you know, to be worked. They're tested and they're proven to work well together.
Yeah, Johnny, that to that integration point, I was to add to that a little bit when I think of like certified or validated patterns, like validated configurations, like that's really important just when you think of some variability based on the business drivers and where kind of your source and destination look, you know, like what that looks like. It eliminates, and I've seen this journey over time where it's just, you know, you find out you've got broken processes or procedures at the worst possible time. And, you know, obviously having validated designs or configurations that are certified, it kind of eliminates or at least helps with kind of a standard config. And then you just kind of bolt on business processes and other procedures that you need to follow, to your point with the other bullets and other areas that you're talking about here. So
yeah, and I just want to comment on one thing you said, Johnny, about, you know, hopefully you don't have to do a recovery. I'm just going to say, you know, have your backup strategy in place, have your disaster recovery strategy in place, do all the right things, but please, please, please test recovery.
yes,
because you know, the worst thing you can find out is when you need to do a recovery that your backup was corrupt.
Yep.
That is so true. And even just from a procedural level, that back when I did consulting, the most successful customers were the ones that really did test with user load those failover procedures at a particular point, because, you know, if a disaster does happen, it's something that is maybe not fresh in their minds, but something that's been updated, that these documents are, you know, are living, that we know that this is going to work. Yeah, I was struck a bit by the integration point between orchestration and replication software. I know this can always be a thing, but it feels like in Kubernetes, with all of the manifest objects, that we're moving more and more where these configuration artifacts are something that we need to take care of. It doesn't help us a lot to take the database and move it to another data center and then have to redeploy a lot of stuff or try to figure some things out. So that's the point I think that stood out the most to me, is that this integration piece between just with the software and the orchestrator and how all that replication happens. Something as simple as, well, on the other side, do we know how to scale everything up properly? Are the secrets in there, like you mentioned, Johnny? Are the ingresses and everything else that makes this application run properly, have they been not only replicated, but are we keeping them up to date?
Yeah, I think certainly for us, BCDR strategies are nothing new. You know, we've been evolving in the space for traditional applications for decades. I think with the emergence of modern application strategies like GitOps framework, CI/CD pipelines, declarative application development, some of the paradigms have shifted. such as, how does an application keep its statefulness and recovery in context of cluster resources, right? So that's where that integration part comes in. And also being able to address BCDR from both a declarative and imperative application paradigm. In the case of, within a modern cloud native application platform, you're looking at both declarative applications in containers as well as imperative traditional applications that you may be bringing into a virtualized deployment. And it doesn't just fold nicely into traditional BCDR strategies. So, you have to address all of that in order to be successful. I think also, the evolving sophistication of cyber attacks that we've seen recently, increased security compliance regulations that we've been watching, all of that grow over the past decade, it really necessitates addressing BCDR right out of the gate with these new application strategies. Now, I was just going to say one other thing, that typically I see, people are looking at OpenShift, they're looking at containers and these new application modernization strategies to accelerate their time to market. And we see that as a huge benefit for customers who are moving to OpenShift.
And so I'm kind of going to go through this slide a little bit, and I'd love to hear from everybody just a little bit about what your design looks like here. And for our part with Portworx, it's really around, well, Kubernetes-centric backup, as well as those controls for ransomware remediation, that immutability from backups, being able to have those multiple copies, RBAC for sharing those sorts, all of these backups to spin up environments like you mentioned, Michael, as well as the replication pieces. Portworx itself can do both synchronous replication, so two OpenShift clusters that are able to have transactions synchronously committed to another OpenShift cluster, so that in the event of a disaster, it's as simple as scaling up those applications again, to asynchronous replication, where when we have a further distance to go, we can replicate on a timer and do the same sort of startup procedure, where we're just scaling the applications. Because one of the things Portworx does is replicate all of those manifests, as well as orchestrate the restart of those applications. But yeah, curious from your perspective, Michael.
Yeah, so from a zero data loss perspective, if we're looking at a zero or a very close to zero RPO, it's kind of essential. And I go back to my point about, like, if you have an application that's tied to a database, maybe you need to build into your strategy, how are you going to acquiesce that data before you do your backup and you're taking your snapshots. In some cases, you'll never get to a true zero RPO, but you want to reduce that as much as possible. And then as far as the RTO goes, I think that is really a question of the criticality of the application. And that's where, as I was talking before, you have your layers of protection. You have your cluster recovery that capability that's there. You have your metro cluster capability that's synchronous. You have asynchronous capabilities. And I kind of see this as, depending on the maturity of your application development platform, you're probably building each of those things into your overall strategy, depending on the application granularity and the business criticality of those applications. And then, I think from the flexibility standpoint, being able to use all of those and then being able to deploy those across different architectures, right? Whether it's an on-prem architecture out to the cloud, out to a managed service, being able to take into consideration edge applications, right? So if you have applications that are running in a provider edge, or even at a device edge. How do you protect those applications and the data that's being transferred back to a central location around those things? These are all very important considerations that you might not be thinking of at first, but are encompassed in your overall end-to-end BCDR strategy. And then, from an accelerated performance perspective, I think we've got some great work that we've been doing with Intel, other partners. For example, Cisco actually just deployed a paper around running our multi-cloud GitOps validated pattern within the Cisco flash stack validated design. That is a design that's built with Pure Storage underneath, and they use Portworx for their persistent storage in that solution as well. They also talk about in that paper, they talk about parsing out to a ROSA deployment or a Red Hat OpenShift on AWS service, managed service deployment. So, having that full spectrum there. And then working with Intel has been great. We actually, going back to the validated patterns, they just published with the AMX acceleration. AMX acceleration is more geared at AI workloads, but they just published a paper around some performance testing with both our multi-cloud GitOps validated pattern and our medical diagnosis validated pattern, showing the value of AMX acceleration. But there's also things like QAT, TDX, the trusted domains that we're also working on with Intel, and you'll see some papers coming out in the next quarter or two that are addressing those things with 4th generation and now 5th generation Xeon processors that are really important to being able to have that performant solution and some of the security features that we'll be seeing accelerated by things like trusted domains in the 5th generation Xeon processors that build into our whole BCDR spectrum.
Yep. That is interesting. Yeah, I'll look forward to some of those papers. Brian, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so just kind of piggybacking off of what Michael was just talking about. Obviously, we're talking about 4th gen here. You'll also hear the name Sapphire Rapids. A couple things related to the accelerator side of this. Michael mentioned AMX, which is kind of an AI accelerator that kind of offloads some of that capability around like image recognition, natural language processing. And we've seen some great results out of benchmarks that give you a capability where you can leverage, I call it more general compute, and some of the accelerators that are built into the die on the chip itself to leverage that capability. Other accelerators, and there's a bunch of them, but a couple others that I want to focus on was Michael also mentioned QAT, which is kind of an accelerator that basically helps with encryption or compression from a storage or networking perspective. It really helps drive a solution and make it more performant when it comes to those specific tasks. And I know earlier in the conversation, we were also talking about cyber risk, limiting kind of your surface area attack. And that kind of goes to a couple different things here. I'll mention TDX, which is like trust guard extensions. That really basically creates kind of a trusted execution environment for a VM, and obviously the container could be running inside that VM to basically be encrypted in memory. So it limits your surface area attack, but it also makes it an easier lift for you to be able to implement. Another thing too that's probably a little bit more specific is related to SGX, which is basically even limiting that surface area attack a little bit smaller on an application by application basis. So there's a lot that's being developed here. Obviously, we're talking 4th gen, 5th gen. Emerald Rapids just got released, and the capabilities are only going to get stronger. So hopefully that helps, Chris. share a little light on some of the.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's almost we could probably have a whole other section talking about like confidential containers with I love some of the information you guys have out there on like Kata containers and some of those different strategies for how to really have those trusted containers deployed. I guess I'll move on here to, hey, so what are the benefits to an organization? And Johnny, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I think the three here are pretty much a good breakdown of what the main benefits are. But number one is probably the most important outcome. It's the whole reason we're here. We want to be able to run critical applications in Kubernetes, and you can't do that if you can't, have a system in place to ensure that the applications don't lose data during recovery or don't go down for too long. I think that ties into that second point too of maintaining compliance, because some businesses have applications that are in situations that are critical enough that a prolonged outage would actually put them out of regulatory compliance, and they start having to pay for that. And obviously being down for a long period of time is bad for many other reasons, reputational loss and like potential sales and like, the list goes on. So there's definitely a lot of a reason behind number two. And then the benefit number three there of achieving scalability is, I think it's really important given the competitiveness and the desire to, be continually improving and continually coming out with improving applications, that you keep that pipeline going. And that's where the scalability is coming in, is you need to be able to deploy all these without having any sort of administrative burden slowing it down, without basically the BCDR system slowing down app improvement and app development.
Yeah, that is interesting. Anyone else have any thoughts on this they'd like to add? That was a terrific summary.
Yeah, I think overall a great summary. And I would just say, I think from my perspective, working in partner ecosystem, Portworx Pure Storage has been a great partner. Intel has been an awesome partner, working on a lot, and this is going over many, many years, working on a lot of these engineering, performance, availability, resiliency testing that we've been doing. And it's just really great to see all of these parts coming together. And we're working with a lot of partners in the field as well, especially global system integrators like Accenture and Deloitte, HCL, folks like that, as well as even more of the regional system integrators. We've been working with Converged Technology Solutions, for example, to build on this full portfolio of products that we go to market together, and just really build out that ability to address not just the technology part of this, but the entire life cycle and how this comes to fruition, the strategy around it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, perfect. Well, for all of this, I'll give a plug for this IDC report. If you have not read it, I learned a ton. Would really encourage taking a look at it. It really talks a lot about and clarifies a lot of the challenges. So a lot of what we talked about here, but a lot more detail there. So Johnny, wonderful job with this. Really, really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you.
Any closing thoughts from anybody?
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for IDC, Red Hat, Portworx for pulling this together. This is great.
Yeah, this was a pleasure. So thank you all, and thanks for everyone for tuning in, and we'll see everyone next time.
What an incredible chat. Thank you, Chris, Johnny, Brian, Michael. I really appreciate you sharing all your insights and knowledge with us today. Unfortunately, I know we've taken up a good chunk of your time and you're all going to have to take off, so we don't have time for a live Q&A. However, any questions that did come in, the team will reach out and follow up with a little bit of info as well. So don't be alarmed. And I'm sure that the audience, you guys are probably all here today, will have a lot to think about and put into action after hearing this fireside chat. I want to remind you all that you can visit the handouts section to get some great resources and follow-ups from the chat here. Once again, if you click into the Get Started with Portworx there in the Handouts tab, you'll be able to link to the Resource Center, and you'll also just be one click away from taking that first step to learn more about Portworx, or you can trial the platform. Okay, you probably see this Amazon gift card image in front of your eyes. And before we wrap up, I do have this little bit more of fun to give away the gift card as a prize. A reminder, you must be present at the live webinar today to win. And without further ado, today's winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Ruben Brown from Georgia. Congratulations to you, Ruben. As always, we will be in touch about claiming your prize after the webinar. And with that, and on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Portworx by Pure Storage for making this webinar possible. And I especially want to thank our incredible speakers, Chris, Johnny, Brian, and Michael, who have given us so much to think about today and so many things to look forward to as we get started with our BDCR journeys. And hey, sending high fives and special thank yous to all of you who are here with us in the audience and making this possible as well. I know sometimes it can be difficult to stop and lift our heads up from our day, from our laptops. And resiliency planning is not only looking up and out, it's planning for something you hope never happens. So that is not always easy to make a mental space for, make it your priority. But today, you all took that step towards a BDCR strategy, and I'm so happy that we could be a part of that with you here together. I know I have learned a ton from this session today, and I hope to have you all learning an equal or much higher amount than myself. So hopefully that took place. I can't wait to see you at a webinar again soon. And until then, have an absolutely magical day. Thank you.